Okay. Uh, Welcome back, everyone. This is week 7 for Race, Crime, and Justice. And this is the last chapter of the book, and that's the future for the subject race, crime, and justice. And so I'm going to start off before we dive into this to saying, excuse me, this week we do have 2 discussion boards. The first one is a very easy and should be reminiscent of the very first discussion board, in which I'm asking you, what have you learned? And has your opinion or anything related to all of this, has it changed? Um, but yep, that's what we're going with. That's what we're gonna just kind of talk about today is the future of race, crime, and justice. And so the text itself starts by reviewing everything from the book, and I think that's a good way to do it. Is just kind of go over what the chapters, the big takeaways. Not that there weren't several things to take away, but the big emphasis takeaways that should be coming from each of the chapters. We're gonna briefly talk about. Um, so what happens now? Well, the book taught us in chapter 1 that almost all persons of color don't commit crime. That's a very important distinction we need to remember as we're going through this, that not all people of color commit crime. While they make up about 31% of the total population, they represent 55% of all state prisoners and 69% of all federal prisoners. So people of color are disproportionately more represented in our prison population when compared to our actual population. So that's to remind us, chapter 1 was all about setting it up. Chapter 2, the big takeaway was that news media contributes to the implicit biases and reinforces negative stereotypes of most, if not all, persons of color. And so the idea is that, and what your main project, the Court of Public Opinions, kind of emphasizes is that how we portray people, the power of our words, what we do matters, and the way news media phrases things, frames things, puts things forward, that has a direct influence on this. And sometimes it's a matter of reinforcing negative stereotypes, sometimes it's contributing to the implicit biases of individuals, and sometimes it's just reinforcing their own implicit bias. But the idea is that the swarm of news media coverage does actually have an impact on these kinds of statistics and these rates. Chapter 3 looked at, well, African Americans and Latinx statistically commit more crime than white individuals. And again, remember, yes, statistically speaking, people who are African American or of Latin descent, statistically, they commit more crime than white individuals. But the piece that that chapter mentioned and made sure to put forward is that this is more of a result of poverty and other negative influences in that culture, whether it's personal culture like their friends group, or if that's the environment that they grew up in or they're living in, or whatever it may be. It is not an issue of race. It's actually an issue of poverty and negative cultural influences. And of course, we see that disproportionately with people of color because of other issues outside of criminal justice into the wider society that forces these individuals to be in this situation that leads to an increase. So it's not a factor of race, it's a factor of poverty and negative influences. Chapter 4 was that most crime is intraracial, remembering happening within the same race. So intraracial is African American on African American, Latinx on Latinx, white on white. That's the predominant model of crime. Is that most crime happens with people of the same groups, beliefs, things of that nature. However, most Native American crime is interracial, happening between different races. So it tends to be that the statistics show that Native Americans are essentially targeted more by other races than themselves. And of course, chapters 5 and 6, because this is chapter 7, but chapters 5 and 6 had a lot of stuff to go over, so they get their own slide. But chapter 5 and 6 kind of was looking at the influences of how all these things work within the criminal justice system as a whole. And so the big takeaway should be that the history of America has been deeply connected to racial stereotypes and general racism, sexism, ageism, etc. The idea is that our founding of a country is so interconnected with these issues that we can't just separate them out. Ignoring that they exist doesn't help that either. It's an idea of we see that it was designed a particular way, that we went through certain things. That doesn't mean that we pretend it never happened. It means we continue moving forward with it. This goes in as well. The way we have treated persons of color as a whole, and I mean society, not just white people, but everyone, society, the way we treat persons of color has influenced the modern systems of criminal justice. And then we get into the specifics. Remember, the big piece is police discrimination is connected to pre-existing implicit biases and stereotypes in both officers and in those who create the policies. So it's not all officers are racist. Sometimes the policies were written by someone with an implicit bias that makes it a racist stop. So not all cops are racists, but criminal justice as a whole is racist, is that kind of idea. Remember, we have all our own implicit biases and stereotypes. So also remember with this is that, not all cops are terrible, but understanding that the justice system is not equal, not even for people who are white. It is a very financial discretion thing. Anyway, remember that prosecution and punishment is influenced by poverty and race. This particularly comes down to the argument of bail versus imprisonment. People of color tend to be not offered bail and put in prison, or their bail is higher than they can afford, and that kind of nature. As well as sometimes with prosecution, they might not proceed depending on race. It tends to be that sentencing we see white tends to be lesser in that nature. Reminder that the war on drugs was designed to target low-income people of color, primarily African American individuals. It was not designed to reduce drug crime. It was targeted for crack cocaine and not powder cocaine, which was a white glamour drug versus a street black drug. And so there's a severe issue with this in the war on drugs. And then remember, the juvenile justice system has a bias towards young, aggressive African American and Latino boys. Based off of the culture and how they are perceived, they are aggressive, and that leads to them being higher rates of involved with the justice system and put in juvenile detention and things of that nature. As well as capital punishment is pursued more for criminals of color when the victim is white. Remember that as well. Those were the big takeaways from the chapters. So, with all of that in mind, question, why is this still happening? Well, it's a compounding of things. It's all these things. This is still an issue because we don't have a necessarily straightforward solution. So, what can we do? And I literally took these key chapter headings and made a slide for each because this is the sum up to the end of the book. So this is the what do we do? What does the future look like? So we talked about all these things. We've looked at how they've been happening, and it's not like they've disappeared, as we've talked about several times now. We still see issues of this happening. So what can we do? And truly, the two big things that we do is address the causes of crime and reform criminal justice. And so the text does go into this address the causes of crime. And so I ask us to think back through all the book and look at this chapter and think about this and what are the causes of crime. And for my criminal justice students, I argue that you should remember these when you go potentially into a career in criminal justice. What are the causes of crime? They are poverty, opportunities for crime and victimization, and really interaction with families and schools. It's the social interaction and developmental. It is poverty and it is opportunities, both physical and environmental. Those are the big pieces. Those are the causes of crime. For my psychology students and sociology students, remember these things and continue to push if you plan on going into this field. Push for changes in criminal justice. Push for changes in the way we operate because this is how we do it. And so, the causes of crime, we're going to go just piece by piece. Poverty and community prevention. So, we need to address poverty in particular. There needs to be an understanding, and these are all, and I'm saying this because this is related to discussion board post as well. So, the book puts forward how do we address poverty through community prevention? Well, there needs to be an increased public expenditure for job training. We need to be able to, within impoverished communities and communities where they do not have a lot of money and they are low income, there needs to be financing for actual job training. So it's not something that they have to pay for. It's something that is offered to them for free so that they can get training for a better job other than, cashier, like actually something that can help improve their situation. It also comes down to expanding government aid to lift people from poverty. And I know the moment we say that, it's like, well, that affects our taxes. You're right. But expanding how that aid works and what is available does make a difference. And, when you decrease the rate of poverty, you decrease the rate of crime. There is an actual statistical balance there. Surprising that we have to say this, but end racial segregation in housing. We still see this issue where housing authorities and affordable housing tends to be dominated by people of color, and there seems to be this wonderful, and I say that with air quotes and being completely sarcastic, separation based off of uh, racial background and ethnic background determines, whether or not there's a deep background check when you apply to rent or what kind of loan you get. And all of a sudden it's based off of your skin tone and not who you are. And that's a whole nother issue. So we need to end that kind of racial segregation in housing in general. No more white neighborhoods, no more black neighborhoods. It should be neighborhood, period. We need to reduce urban neighborhood dilapidation, which is a fun word, but what we need to do is we need to fix up broken down homes. We need to, actually care for the things. I've mentioned it before. There is a theory in criminal justice that is broken windows theory, and it's the idea that if a property looks really bad and like nobody cares, it'll increase the rate of crime in that area, because if nobody cares about that property, nobody will care about crime, and so you can get away with crime. It's a whole psychological thing, but it's important to note that, structural collapse and just neighborhood collapse can lead to an increase in crime. So let's get rid of that. We need to increase programs like youth recreation programs and parental involvement in school efforts. And that again comes back to this community point that we've talked about before. We've not talked in this class, but community corrections. The idea that it's not just the officers, the government officials, it's everyone. You get people involved. When you, the old adage, the idle hands are the devil's playthings, kind of is true. When there's nothing to do, you're going to find something to do. And opportunity can tend to be criminal activity. So, offering programs that take children out of the potential to become involved in criminal activity, in gangs, things of that nature will help. And getting parents involved with school will does show an increase in educational success and ability. And I don't mean helicopter parent where the parent is 24/7 knowing everything about their kid. No, I mean parents being involved with their children's schoolwork and their activities and things of that nature help promote this positive experience, this positive outlook, and that does have a direct connection to crime. And then, as well, establish and expand adult mentoring programs for at risk youth. So, you may be familiar with Big Brother, Big Sister type thing, but that's the idea, is that we offer positive role models for children to show that it's possible, that this is something to work towards, and that does have a positive impact on overall crime issues. Um, Heck, if we can just change the statistic of most prisoners are people of color, is a big step. It's not a great step, but it's a big step. We need to get rid of racism in general, but that's a whole other issue. So I've kind of been bleeding into it, but families and schools is another thing, and this comes down to developmental prevention. And so my psychology and sociology students here, this is your area of thought processes, more so, but the idea is that we need to establish and expand early childhood intervention programs for at risk children and their families. Home visits, parent training, it's connected. Like I said, this is all these things are interconnected. The causes of crime is mainly poverty, and that plays into 18 million other things. But sometimes parents don't know how to parent. There is not a class that everyone has to take to learn how to be a parent. Anyone can be a parent, and that's part of the issue. Sometimes you don't know what it's like. Heck, a lot of parents, there's a reason they call them first time parent. You learn on the job. All the books in the world, all the advice in the world, until you're in it's different. And so, truly, establishing and extending early childhood intervention is perfect. Having that kind of education for parents, offering medical services, things of that nature, that makes big difference and a big impact on the longevity and the long-term success of these individuals, so that they're not committing crime. Provide affordable and high-quality daycare for parents who need it. And this is something that I didn't think about until recently, and I didn't get into until my partner started working at a daycare. But daycares are expensive, and typically the idea is that the more expensive they are, the better they are, and that's partly because they can hire the better staff, the more qualified individuals. It's not to say that people that work at the lower end priced daycares aren't qualified. There are plenty that are. But what we see is that child care and daycare is super important, especially for people who are living in poverty. You need to be able to go to work, but there's a fine line between how much you pay for daycare and how much you make it work. And that is a dangerous game. Um, Random fact history about your professor. I was raised by a single mother on the Lower East Side of Erie. She was working two part time jobs on top of a full time job, as well as going back to college when I was young. And so daycare. She was lucky that um, her sister, my aunt, moved back to town from Buffalo when I was born, and so when she needed help, my aunt would take care of me. And she was a former nun, and so she took me to the Benedictine Sisters, Mount St. Benedict, out on the east side, uh, past Harbor Creek and everything, out towards northeast. Like, I got childcare. My mom got childcare for me based off of family, and it was no price. It was just my aunt took care of me. And so not everybody has that opportunity. And so this is a very difficult thing. And being able to offer affordable childcare, I would argue that childcare should probably be, you know, government funded so that people can actually send their children to daycare that is good quality and doesn't cost them any direct money. It might be taxed and all that other stuff. But anyway, that's my own radical thoughts in education. But this is a pathway to helping with developmental prevention and tackling poverty at the same time by saying, hey, let's offer daycare so that parents can work normal hours, potentially increase the amount of money they make, get out of poverty, and move from a situation that would encourage crime. Um, Obviously, greatly increase funding and other efforts to improve schools in low income, urban, and rural areas. Again, the teacher in me and the I have a degree in education in me goes, yeah, funding for schools in particular in low income areas is absolutely terrible. Even in Erie County, if you grew up in Erie County, I'm sure you can tell me what schools were the rich schools, and if you were a county kid, you might probably know what was the good county school and things of that nature. And it's true. They had the best teachers, they had the best services, they had the best equipment. It, it's not it's not fair. And students who students who go to a school that doesn't have all those opportunities, they miss out on some part of education. And that it's a complicated matter. And all I'm going to say is that there should be uh, better better allocated and more appropriate funding for schools, especially in low income areas. And then go figure. Provide better health and nutrition services for families before and after a child's birth. Formula is expensive as all crap. Eating healthy in this current environment is expensive as crap. But living healthy has a direct impact. And so it's a very complicated matter, but we do need to provide better health and nutrition services across the board, both in low income areas as well as, I would say, middle of the road, because it's finding ways to be healthy on a budget is a super important thing. And we actually, last year, EC3 did actually have a guest speaker talk about living healthy on a budget. And uh, it focused on, if I don't have a lot of money, what's a way that I can eat healthy or prepare food healthy, or what kind of foods could I buy? And it was really good. I attended it because it matters to me, and I also may or may not be one of those people. Anyway, so the other component of this is situational prevention, and the focus is on opportunities for crime and victimization. And so obviously installing better lighting and closed circuit cameras in public places. If there is better lighting and better security in general, you're going to see a reduced level of crime. Uh, it's just the nature of, if you know you're being watched, you tend not to do it. Typically. Expand neighborhood watch groups expand community policing and directed police activity in crime hotspots while still preserving civil liberties. Pretty much just, the same concept. You increase this being observed and you reduce crime in theory. Um, which, if you've taken some of the other classes, you know exactly why I said in theory. Um, there's also expand focus deterrence strategies that target specific gang members and other chronic offenders while still preserving their civil liberties. And I say this one, I do not want it to get controversial. Please don't get all argumentative about this one, but increasing gun safety efforts is a huge component of all this. Gun safety is important. That's all I'm going to say. So, as far as reform criminal justice, you'll notice I don't have anything under there. Well, the book puts forward a lot of them, and I'm just going to kind of go through them. But what I need to say about this before we dive into it is that reforming criminal justice, addressing the causes of crime are great ideas. They put forward a lot of really cool things that could work and would have a direct impact, but they're costly and they're not easy to perform. Reforming criminal justice is something that is a long and slow process. Reforming any kind of actual system takes time. And so, while these are really good points and pieces to remember, just know that it's not that, we're going to reform criminal justice in 1 year. It's going to take a long time. And so the book puts forward establish and expand racial bias education and training programs for police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals. Having training and education to recognize your own implicit bias is a pretty good idea. Of course, in areas where it doesn't matter because they're going to believe it anyway or they know they have it, it's going to be a bit of a problem. But in general, drawing attention to someone's own biases tends to make people more conscious of it. So that is something that is worthwhile. Consider decriminalizing many illegal drugs and at a minimum, target minority drug offenders only in proportion to their rate of drug offenses. Such an extreme thought by some people, but decriminalize most drugs, as we've seen more recently. So marijuana in Erie City, it's been decriminalized. You, it's not a criminal offense to possess a small amount of marijuana. In the old days, it was like when we decriminalize illegal drugs, you see a decrease in crime and arrest rates, and that's a big deal because it shows us how many drug crimes are being charged. So yeah, eliminate the death penalty, which is racially discriminatory, arbitrary, and ineffective in reducing homicide. And yeah, again, this is another controversial one, but it is interesting to note that the death penalty itself statistically ends up being more expensive than life imprisonment, which is hilarious because one of the biggest arguments people have for the death penalty is that it's actually more expensive to keep them alive, but several studies have been done and compared departments, and it ends up almost all the time being that the cost for all the required drugs, the placement, the facilities to kill an individual is and to keep them on that death row until that time is more expensive than just a life imprisonment sentence. Anyway, but that's a minor piece. But on top of that, the homicide rates, we don't really. It comes down to a conversation in the wider spectrum and range of criminal justice that we haven't really talked about in this class because this is race, crime, and justice. But deterrence is the idea that you are trying to reduce the amount of people that want to commit a crime. the death penalty has statistically not reduced the rate of homicide. It hasn't. The threat of losing your life does not directly cause people to kill less. It gets into a deeper conversation about what does work, and we're not quite sure yet, but important to put forward. Improve and expand legal defenses for indigent defendants and regulate plea bargaining to reduce guilty pleas by innocent defendants. And just a reminder, going back, that if you have not taken other criminal justice classes, most criminal cases are actually resolved by a plea bargain. Most of them do not go to court. So, having a better system in place for plea bargaining so that innocent individuals aren't taking a plea bargain because they don't want to take it to court because the evidence is not in their favor, but they know they didn't do it. It's a whole issue. As well as, indigent is people that cannot do it themselves. So the impoverished, offering, better services from public defenders, which is a complicated matter in itself. Take criminal law if you're interested in that conversation, because we do talk about it there. But yeah, there's some issues with legal defense availability for people who cannot afford it, which disproportionately represents people of color. We should also be looking into, for reforming criminal justice, according to the text, eliminate mandatory minimum sentencing and shorten maximum sentences generally. Which, again, great in theory, great idea, but what impact will that have on crime rates? We don't know, because at the same time, what impact do they already have? But it would help make this change. Because, again, some people who are being arrested for things that should not be, or have been arrested and had longer sentences due to their color of their skin, as we've discussed in this class before. Expand the use of community corrections for property offenses and nonviolent offenders. So pretty much, instead of sending nonviolent offenses and property offenses to jail and prison, we put them on home release and things of that nature. We use the community correctional idea rather than sending them to a facility and lead to overcrowding, which is an issue that we talk about in Intro to Corrections, which we are talking about this week as well. This one is a big one, and kind of why I've been rushing through most of these, but expand and improve substance abuse, mental health, educational and vocational, and other services for prison inmates. Again, if you're in Intro to Corrections, you already know a lot of this, but for those of you who are not, when an individual is sentenced and put into the prison system, the goal is to rehabilitate, and the goal of rehabilitation means that they have to go through certain things. And so the big wonderful model is that they get the services that they need. But what several students have pointed out, what several experts in the field have written about, there is a severe issue. It's a lack of services and understanding of substance abuse, mental health issues, things like that. But we need to make it more widespread, more available, that these individuals can, as well as educational and job training. Because if the plan is that they're going to be released back into society, how do you prevent them from committing crime? Well, you get them prepared to actually have a real job, a real chance, and something that'll, keep them busy enough not to commit a crime. That kind of idea. And then the last one that the text puts forward is improve prisoner re-entry programs that help release prisoners adjust to society. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was just saying. The goal is to release them. The goal is that they are going to become full functioning members of society upon release. How do we get there? Well, we need to have programs in place that help them get ready for what life on the outside is going to be like. And so that is a big step. So what can I do? Or rather, what can we as individuals do? And the text puts forward these, and they're pretty good, and I just want to talk a little bit about them. And that's talk to others, teach others, push for reform. We'll talk about that, vote consciously in a second. Organize nonviolent protests, rallies, and marches, and confront the prejudice head on with bravery and confidence. These are all things that we can do in our day to day. If you know people who are not as informed about issues of criminal justice, or people that want to complain and argue, well, why is it this way? Talk and teach them. You've taken this class, you've learned quite a lot about issues of racial discrimination and bias in the criminal justice system as a whole. Share the book with them, share what you learned with them, talk with them about these things. When you want to push for reform, you need to consider, and this is why I said vote consciously. Remember, and this is especially true for my criminal justice students, because remember in Intro to Criminal Justice, one of the things that I mentioned is that the criminal justice system is inherently political, and it's because the people that make the main decisions are individuals who are voted in. So, when you want to push for reform, when you want to make change, vote consciously. Know who you're voting for and what they stand for. That is a big piece on how we change how these systems work. Right now, in PA, oh my gosh, why am I drawing a blank now? Anyway, we have our governor, Shapiro. I don't know why it took me forever to get there, but our governor and our last governor, Wolf, at the end, in the second half of his term, specified that he was looking into the death sentence here in PA, because we still have it. But while he was looking into it, he did not sign any continuations or pushes for the death penalty to be carried out. Essentially, they were all on a stay of execution. Nobody was executed at that end part. And then when Shapiro came in, same thing. They said that they're not going to sign any of them, that they're not going to have any executions happen in PA while they are governor. And the idea is that they're going to look to changing the law here in PA to remove the death penalty. They saw that, and that is an issue that they believe in, and so that's what they chose. So, if you believe that the death penalty needs to be removed, you want to make sure that you're voting for people who believe the same mission. So, outside of those things that are there, what can you do? In general, outside of everything that's on here, everything we've talked about, what can you do to change this world? Just be kind. Be kind to each other. Listen. Share ideas. Don't fight. Don't yell at each other. Just be kind, nonviolent, and educate. Educate people on things that they might not have access to. And so, with that in mind, as we go to wrap up, I just want to draw your attention to discussion board 9. So again, there are 2 discussion boards this week. The first one was pretty much just what you learn from this class, but discussion board 9 is the $1 million question, and I'm going to pose it to you now, and so that you can think about it before you dive into the discussion board. How do we change? Because if you think about it, going all the way back, the future for race, crime, and justice, we know there's issues. That's what we've learned the whole time. What can we do? What can you do as an individual? So how do we change? How do we change the system, if at all? Why should we change the system, if at all? I know this was a shorter one, but thank you very much. I look forward to seeing all of your projects. I will have your feedback on your outlines as soon as humanly possible this week, and there'll be a separate little video talking about how to submit for next week your actual final projects. But thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful day.